Happy Friday, everyone! And because it's Friday, it's time for our next episode of Toybox Tutorials. I'm taking a few weeks to answer some of the more frequent how-to questions that I am asked about the toy box, and one of the questions I often get involves the bounding box collisions that people run into while they are building. Now, if you've done any building in the toy box, then you've undoubtedly run into this issue, and you've probably noticed that the objects that you're building with have a blue or a green bounding box around them. And sometimes when you try to place these objects, that box turns red, and the game will not let you place that object there. And so when people run into this problem, they will ask me, or they will post the question on Reddit or on the Disney Infinity Discord. And the question goes something like this: is there any way to place toys inside of other toys? Or is there a way to overlap toys? Or is there a way to disable the collision detection so that I can place toys wherever I want without any kind of restrictions? Well, there really isn't an easy answer to that question. The basic answer is that there is no way in-game to disable the collision detection and remove that restriction. There's nothing in the toy box editor or in the game settings that allows you to do that. However, there are some ways to work around it, depending on what exactly you want to do and which specific toys you're working with. But before I get to that, I should probably mention first that if you are on PC, I believe there is a mod that allows you to turn off the collision detection. That Brown Bat posted a video about how to do that, and I'll include a link to it in the video description and on my blog. I don't own a PC, and I don't know anything about this mod, or any other mod for that matter, so I don't know how well it works, or if it causes any bugs or side effects. So if you want to know more about it, you'll have to go watch his video and talk to him about it. I am not going to cover that mod here. My video is for those of you who are not on PC or who do not want to risk using the mod and you want to know what you can do about the collision detection. And as I said, there are some ways to work around it depending on what you want to do and what pieces you're working with. And that's what I want to cover here. I want to give you some tips that might help you out. So in preparation for this video, I built a little racetrack toy box. It's not very big, but it is filled with all kinds of collision detection issues. But the racetrack goes around the perimeter of the toy box. And I've got a lot of fun little things here. I got a little hill to traverse over, and some ziggy-zaggy stuff around some cliffs, and over a bridge before you come back to the starting line. And so as we begin to talk about this issue, let's start with some very easy things that you can do. And so in my toy box, I'm going to place some cliffs around the roads over here. And I decided that I was going to do that after I had already placed some trees and things over here. And so as I'm building my cliffs and I come to the last piece of my cliffs, I go to drop this in place and I run into the red box. And you can see it's intersecting those two little trees down there. And I had placed those first, and now I'm trying to place this cliff piece. And so the first thing you might try is putting down the pieces in a different order. Instead of putting the smaller pieces down first, try putting the bigger pieces in. And so for me, I can remove these smaller pieces out of the way, and then I can put the cliff in. And it's a simple solution, but I wanted to point out that you might start with this first. Always try to put the bigger pieces in before you put the little pieces in, because now you can see I don't have any kind of collision problem. The little piece will fit in here just fine. And this happens with a number of other pieces too. If you've watched any of my build videos for any length of time, you've probably seen me run into this issue where I'm trying to put a couple pieces down, and I put the first piece in, Then I try to put the second piece in and I run into an issue. And so I'll change the order of things and I'll try putting the second piece in first, then the first piece, and then it'll let me do it. So that's the first thing you might try, is just try putting things down in a different order. Now here's another case where you can do something simple to solve the problem. In this situation, I decide that, you know what, I'd like to put these trees right next to each other. And you'll notice this is the Fantasy Terrain 3 out of the plants drawer. And so I slide this over and I run into a problem. I see the dreaded red box, and it will not let me place it right next to it. But when you run into this, one of the things you might try is rotating the pieces, and you'll see that solves the problem. It won't let me put it in this way, but it will let me put it in this way. And I think the problem is that the bounding box for this piece isn't perfectly square, and so sometimes you can get around the issue just by rotating the piece, and then it'll let you drop it into place. Another case where you'll run into that problem is with some of the basic building blocks. Here we have this little piece out of the basic blocks drawer. It's the short block wall, and I've kind of built a little shelter here for the pit crew. And I've decided, you know, I'd kind of like to enclose the back side of this and not leave it open. So we'll try putting down another piece, and we run into a problem. The corners intersect and it won't let you do it. But if you rotate the piece, it'll let you do it. And that's because as you rotate it, it sits a little bit differently than it does when you rotate it 180 degrees. And so that's another situation where just rotating the piece will solve your problem. Now another simple solution for some cases, particularly the customizable plant clusters, is when you want to place this and it overlaps something. So here, if I pick this up, you'll see this is the same Fantasy Terrain 3 that we used over there a moment ago. The only difference is I've styled this, and in doing so it made the bounding box bigger. And I've decided I want to move this closer to the building, and it will not let me put it here. It gives me the red box. But what you can do in this case is go into the styling menu. And we talked about this back in episode 3, I believe it was. Change this to something else, a different theme. So I'll put this back to what it was here. And you'll see this has a smaller bounding box. And I can pick this up and bring it right up next to this. I can't still go into that area around the building, but I can put it up right next to it. And then I can put the theme back the way I want it. Change it back to the Danville theme. And now you see it overlaps and doesn't have a problem until I try to pick this up again, and then it'll give me the red box. So sometimes just changing the customizable plants to a different theme with a smaller bounding box will let you move it closer to where you want it. So those are some of the very simple things that you can do, and oftentimes that's all you really need in order to get what you want. There are some cases, though, where those won't work. And in those cases, you can try using a few Creativitoys that might help you get around the problem. And so here we have a situation where we've got our piece of racetrack, and I've put it hanging over the corner of the terrain there, and that looks a little boxy to me. I'd really like to put one of these in there. But as you can see, it will not let me do that. It's impacting the racetrack, which it really shouldn't, because there technically isn't any real collision. But one of the things you can do is try using a trigger area. And this doesn't always work reliably for me, and I'm going to try to show you an example of that. But what you can do with this is try placing this in the area of overlap. And let me actually rotate this. And we'll grab this opposite corner, and we'll stretch this over the area that I want, where I'm having the overlap problem. Okay? So now we have that there. And let's go ahead and move the racetrack out of the way. And now let's put the pieces where we want them. So we'll put the terrain in first. And then we'll put the racetrack in. And as you can see, it lets me put it in without any problem. All right. And then we can delete the trigger area, and now the piece is in place. Now that only worked because I put the terrain in first, and when I put the terrain in, there wasn't a problem. The trigger area only works with some building pieces, so like with the racetrack pieces, with the doors out of the gameplay toys, and there may be some others that I'm not aware of. But you can't take, for example, if we do this the other way, let me put another bounding box down here. You'll see it gives me that red problem. But let's put this back in again. And let's move this up out of the way. So last time, when I did this the first time, I put the racetrack in first, or the terrain in first, and then the racetrack. All right, and it worked fine. Let's do it the other way this time, and you'll see that it doesn't always work. So we drop this in place, and now let's try to put this in place. And you see it won't let me. So this trigger area issue only works with certain pieces, like the racetrack pieces. So if we put the terrain in first, there isn't a collision issue because it sits in the corner and there's nothing colliding with it. And then we put the racetrack in, and now it works. So I'm kind of belaboring the point, but I want you to see there's an order to this. And you can't just use the trigger area to solve any collision problem you want. It only works with certain pieces, like the racetrack pieces or the doors from the gameplay toys. And there may be others, but I don't have an exhaustive list because I don't use this technique very often. But that's one way around the collision issue. Another way is to use a replayer. And I ran into this exact same issue in my Kingdom Hearts toy box. And if you go watch Kingdom Hearts number 5, where I build the Rumble racing track, you'll see I solved this exact same problem using a replayer. And I've got another example with the replayer over here from one of my earliest videos, my Flight Games series. In episode number 1, I'd like to build, kind of like in this case, a diagonal pavement. And we have these triangular pieces out of the terrain. I've customized one with the grass texture and dropped it in here. And I did the same thing here. And I'd like to take this piece. It doesn't seem like there should be any reason why I couldn't drop this in here, but you'll notice it won't let me. And so that's a problem. But you can use a replayer to get around this. And so what we're going to do is move these grassy pieces up out of the way temporarily. Just kind of lift them up, set them on top of the road. And I'm leaving them just above where they had been placed, because that's going to make the placement of this a little bit easier. And before we use the replayer, we need to set the style of the pieces that we want. So I'm going to use Dusty Crophoppers Runway, and I'm going to set that to be my theme. This terrain piece doesn't really change, but you can't set the theme once the replayer is recording. And we'll go into the properties for the replayer. I'm going to take the playback interval to 0. And now we'll come out of the editor to use the replayer. And I covered the replayer way back in episode 28. But if you need a refresher, you can go watch that. But we'll step on the replayer. That opens the menu in the lower right. On my Wii U, I press B to start recording. And you'll see it, the little icon below B changed from a circle to a square. And then we'll step off the replayer so I can get back into the editor. And now we're going to place these blocks where I want them. And I'm not going to run into any kind of collision detection or collision problem because those grass pieces are sitting above this piece up on the terrain. And we'll put a couple little filler blocks in here as well. Alright, and then I'll exit out of the editor. We'll step on the replayer. Oops. To get the menu in the lower right, I press B to stop recording, and I'm going to press A to rewind or clear. That takes the pieces out that I just put in. And then we can come back over here and drop these pieces back into place because there's nothing that they're going to collide with. Okay. And now we'll come back over to our replayer. Step on the replayer to get our menu in the lower right corner. I press Y to do a playback. And you'll notice it did not place one of the objects. It placed these just fine. And it placed those just fine. So the replayer isn't always reliable. You do run into some issues with it sometimes. One of the things you can do, because I ran into this problem in my flight game series as well, I'll pick that up and put it down, and we'll drop a second replayer. All right. Once again, let's lift this piece up out of the way. We'll leave those other ones in place. And now we'll step on our new replayer. I press B to start recording. I step off. And then we'll put our piece in here. Come back over to our replayer. Press B to stop recording, A to clear. And we'll put this piece back. And then we'll come back over to our other replayer, our second one. Make sure you're using the right replayer here. And now we'll do a playback. And it still doesn't like it. So sometimes you run into this problem, and it's not overly reliable. Let's see. Let's try a clear again. And a playback. And it won't let me do that. Okay. So when that happens, let's go ahead and take this out. And we'll play around with this a little bit. This time, let's pull this piece out. And we'll try putting this piece down. Okay. And we're going to put the grassy piece in with the replayer this time. All right, so I need to change the theme again. Let me do that, because we can't do that while we're recording. So I'll go to Tri-State Area Terrain, which is the theme I'm using. I'll set that to be my theme. All right, and once again, we'll step on our new replayer, start recording, come back into the editor, and now we'll stop recording, and I press A to clear. Now we'll drop this one in place. We'll see if it put the grass in there. Let's get rid of that. Okay. So we'll do a playback, and now it worked. So this was kind of a convoluted thing, but I wanted to show you that sometimes you just have to play with it. If you're not able to get one piece to work by putting this piece in with the replayer, then try it the other way. Try putting in this piece with the replayer, because sometimes you can get it to work. And you just have to kind of play with it. Sometimes one piece wants to be there first, and that's just the way it is. Once we're done, we can go ahead and delete those replayers. So there's our little diagonal strip to get on and off of pit row. Okay. Now, I recommend going back to Toy Box Tutorials episode 28, where I covered the replayer. If you haven't watched that episode, you should go watch it, because there are some other issues with the replayer that you need to be aware of. And I talk about that in that episode and how to avoid or work around those issues. So this is kind of another scenario where you'll run into that problem. So I wanted to make sure that I covered that. Like I said, I feel like I beat this to death with the replayer, but I really wanted you to see how to get around the problem and the kinds of problems that you run into. Okay, so another possibility. Let's say, for example, that I really don't like this block sitting here like this. I really want it like that. But of course, it's not letting me do that because of that red bounding box. So let me move this out of the way temporarily. And what you can do instead, if you come down to the Creativitoys drawer, we're going to use the Path Creator to do this. And I covered the Path Creator back in episodes 33 through 39. But this is another use for the Path Creator that I didn't really talk about in those episodes. But what we're going to do is we're going to center this underneath that block where it's going to end up going. I'm going to drop that path, and it didn't put me in point mode, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that and do that again. Here, this time it did. So now we can drop a second path point, and we'll exit out. And we'll go down and change the path properties. And we're going to turn off auto start objects when connected. Okay. So when you connect objects to a path, these objects will sit on the path and they'll travel along that path, and they'll pass through other objects while they're moving. You can turn off the movement behavior like I just did by turning off the active flag or the auto start flag. And now when we connect this to the path, it's going to sit right on top of this path point, the very first path point there. So we'll come over to our block. And the caveat is that not all objects have the ability to connect to a path. Only some. But for the ones that do, you can use this trick. We connect it to the path. You'll notice it's now sitting exactly where I want it to sit. And that's very helpful. Again, not all toys can be connected to a path, though. There are some that can be. And so we could use this exact same trick down on this corner to place a block there. And then we can come back to our blocks drawer. And the rest of these don't have a collision problem, so you can drop these right in place. But as I said, you get down to the corner and you run into that same problem. So what you can do is drop another path point right on the ground in the middle where this block would sit, just like we did over on this side, and do the exact same thing, and that'll put this block right in that hole. And if you want to see some more examples of how to get around the collision detection using a path, you can look at Toy Story episode number 2, where I built Andy's room, and look at how I did the baseboards there. If you want to see something a little more complex, you can look at Disneyland episode number 78, where I built the Small World toy shop, and you can really go nuts getting the blocks to overlap and build some really complex shapes like I did there with that toy shop. But this is a very simple scenario of how you can use that. But again, not everything can be connected to a path. For example, this block, you'll notice in the menu in the lower right that the logic menu is not available. So you can't do that. If you look, though, at this little terrain block that I put down earlier, that does have a logic menu. And if I open it up, that does have a new path connection. So some terrain blocks have the ability to connect to a path. Most of them do not. Things like the stadium stands don't. Things like these trees don't. Things like those buildings don't. Most things don't have that capability. This little guy, you can put him on a path. So if you want the inflatable Guido balloon to move along on a path or to overlap and sit, for example, in the middle of this square here, you can do that. So for the objects that do connect to a path, you have that option. Well, I hope these tips will help you when you run into the bounding box collision issue in your builds. Some of these tips may be more effective in certain situations than others, but at least this video will give you some ideas for things to try. Well, that's all I have for you today. If you have any other tips or tricks that I did not cover here, be sure to leave a comment and share it with us. I'm sure everyone will appreciate that. Leave a comment too if you found this video helpful. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.